Well, I'm so glad you're here today. I think this eating is an important topic to all humans, so I'm glad to see so many people interested in this important topic. I'm a certified nutrition consultant. I have been working with children on the spectrum for 14 years, and so I'm looking forward to sharing my research and my clinical experience with you today. I'm not a doctor. I'm a certified nutrition consultant. So we're going to talk about nutrition and autism from the perspective of what do we know about what's going on biochemically and how can food and nutrition support that. How many of you are doing a special diet right now? Great. How many of you have never tried a special diet before? Wonderful. Welcome. And how many of you, of those of you who are doing a special diet, are you doing GFCF? All right. Is anybody doing anything other than GFCF? Okay. Great. That's really helpful for me to get started here. And I'm just curious, how many of you have heard me speak before? Anybody? Not that you need to, I just want to know. Okay, so I'd like to try to include plenty of new stuff for people that have seen me before, but also make sure that I cover all the basics. I live in San Francisco, and to get here, I was sponsored by Speech Nutrients, and so just in full disclosure, I thought I'd let you know that. I typically like to work with companies that I really like their products and have a nice mutual synergy where we can support each other. So just wanted to let you all know that. Today, for those of you who would like the slides, I will be emailing those slides out to people. There's 3 things I'm going to send you. One is the slides. Also, the ebook. I have an ebook, and you're getting the first chapter. So that handout you have is basically the first chapter from the ebook. And then I'm going to be emailing the rest of it out to you. So people who want to come by our booth and sign up with our email, you will get all of that, as well as a GFCF guide that I will briefly describe today as well. So we're going to talk about autism and other conditions as a whole body condition. And we're going to talk about the state of nutrition today, the foods and ingredients to avoid, as well as the nutrient-dense foods to add. Then we're going to talk about special diets that you may have heard of, maybe some of you are doing, and also some support for picky eaters. So I think of autism and ADHD as neurological conditions where the body chemistry influences the brain chemistry. And the brain is not an isolated island all to itself. It's connected to the body, and it is influenced by all of the rest of the chemistry going on. And I think that's really important because a lot of times it seems like, how do you affect the brain? How do you affect behavior and those sorts of things? Well, it's part of everything else going on. And how do we create this chemistry or this biochemistry? Food. Nutrients come from one of 2 ways. We either eat them or we create them. And often we create them from things that we eat. So diet is very important for this chemistry in order to support us, and it can either be used for healing or it can be a factor in disease as well. So this is a chart that goes through just 3 of the main areas that I think about that are affected with autism spectrum disorders, as well as other conditions that affect the brain, like ADHD and anxiety and things. So when we look at these systems, we see the immune system, the digestive system, and the detoxification systems play big roles in what happens to the brain or the neurology that's all affected. And everybody is different. So some people... and I think this is my opinion, that someday we will find out that there's not one autism, that there are many different types of autism, many different triggers for autism, many different ways somebody might be affected. And some people have stronger buckets than others, stronger, systems in various areas. So some kids with autism have a lot of gut inflammation, and inflammation is regulated by the immune system. Some of them have really poor pathogen fighting capability, and they end up with lots of antibiotics and other things. Some of them have brain inflammation that we've seen from studies. So the immune system regulates our ability to fight off pathogens as well as create a proper immune response, but then turn off that inflammatory response as well. There's the digestive system, which is crucial. Not everybody with autism has a problem with digestion. And sometimes I think a falsehood is that, oh, well, my child doesn't need a special diet or need to worry about nutrition because they don't have any outward gut symptoms. But there are many ways that someone might have problems with digestion, and they may or may not be as obvious as as they are for other people. And then the detoxification. And we know that by the work of some Dr. Jill James and some of the other experts, and even Dr. Martha Herber was talking about the importance of glutathione. We know that in a subset of kids with autism, glutathione, which is a major detoxification substance, is deficient in some of these children. And so when all of these systems may not be functioning optimally, that can affect the brain and the functioning of the brain. So if you have inflammation, you may have brain inflammation. If you aren't breaking down your foods properly, you make your foods into opiates, and opiates are neurochemicals like morphine is an opiate. And if you aren't able to detoxify properly, you might have certain toxins that affect the brain, and so on. So all of the systems of the body are really important in the brain as well. This is a chart from my book, and we won't go into too much detail about it today, but if you've heard of methylation, and there's a really big focus on right now about understanding methylation and how it affects children with autism. And then you need the blue part, that's methylation working, to then affect the glutathione down at the bottom. So you need all of this working and all of that working to just build glutathione as one example. And that needs B12, folate, B6, magnesium, all sorts of nutrients. So if you have a certain, maybe gene that is not as or enzyme that's not working as effectively because of a gene variant or something, you might need more nutrients. You might have a challenge with one of these pathways, for example. And also, you can see that in order to build that little orange box there called sulfation, you need a substance called sulfate, and that also requires all of that methylation and half of that transsulfuration to be working properly in order to be able to do that. And the reason I point out the little orange box, I won't belabor this big slide, but basically methylation is important for your DNA expression, for allergy symptoms, for myelinating the nerves, and all sorts of important things. And then we know glutathione is important for virus fighting and antioxidant protection and detoxification. Sulfation, the little orange box, processes a group of foods and chemicals called phenols, and that's important. We're going to talk about one of the diets. We're going to talk about two main diets today, and the last thing we're going to talk about are phenols. That's one of the diets we're going to talk about, is a low phenol diet, because we know that from the research of Rosemary Waring that a lot of people don't have enough PST to be able to break down certain foods. So my message there is just that each person needs an individualized diet for them, the diet that's going to be the best for that person. So I'm not going to stand up here and say, oh, everybody needs the Julie Matthews diet. It doesn't exist because there is no one diet that works for everybody. My message is there's about a dozen different diets, but to not overwhelm you, there's probably about 4 or 5 core kind of principles to understand, and each person's going to need something unique. So this is what we see in autism. We see a decrease in methylation, a decrease in glutathione, a decrease in sulfate, causing all the challenges that we talked about. So to me, children with autism are the canaries in the coal mine. They're the ones that are telling us that our world is too toxic, too deficient in nutrients, and maybe because of a variety of factors, they tend to be more sensitive to these environmental factors than others, and they tend to get triggered more negatively by them. We see other childhood conditions and even other adult conditions that also have some of these concepts of immune dysregulation or nutrient deficiencies or poor digestion. So we can actually learn a lot from the children with autism for maybe other children in your family that have ADHD, or other members of your family that maybe have an autoimmune disorder. In other words, there's a lot we're learning about autism, and it doesn't just apply to autism. It really, in my experience, applies to what is toxic and problematic for us and the types of things that are supportive. And so a lot of these principles are supportive for other things as well. So as we improve the body and its systems, we support health, learning, and behavior. And I want to talk about the gut briefly because food and the diets we're going to talk about today, where does all food go? It goes to the gut. It goes to the gastrointestinal system. It gets broken down by our digestive system. So food can either be healing and nourishing, or it can be irritating and problematic. That's why the gut, and the gut is, all disease begins in the gut, according to Hippocrates, which I would tend to find true. If someone has a gut problem, that is going to perpetuate into other problems as well, because the gut is so important to breaking down every nutrient we need to build other nutrients and other things. The largest part of the immune system is found in the gut. The largest part of the neurotransmitters of serotonin is actually in the gut, not in the brain. And so the gut is very, very important. The gut's even considered the second brain. And so because food has such direct contact and impact, it is an area that food can play a really big role in helping to support an individual's health and healing. So nutrition is essential for our brain, our body, and even our genes. So we always think of, oh, well, we've got our genes and we're stuck with them, and oh, there's nothing we can do. And I suppose to some extent that's true, but actually our genes and our health is actually equally, or I would even say even more affected by our gene expression. We have a really cool system where our body can turn on and off genes. So we have a certain genetic sequence, but we can turn on and off genes based on our nutrients. So if we are deficient in nutrients, we usually turn those genes in the disease-promoting direction. If we have too many toxins, we turn those genes in the disease-promoting direction. If we have too many stressors, EMFs, other things, the same thing. Whereas if we have proper nutrition, proper support, and not all that other stuff, then we turn our genes in the health-promoting direction. And this can happen throughout our life. But it particularly also happens to fetuses in the womb. So during pregnancy, that's really important, but obviously all of us here already have children as well, and there are still ways you can positively affect these children, even if you're not pregnant and they're already, children or even adults. So genes are important, but we can, we can think of that positively as well. So I wanted to use this sort of as a little bit of an outline for our presentation today. This is actually a visual outline of my book, but that's what we're going to kind of go through a lot of the information here. So we've talked some about the biochemical imbalances and the neurological disorders. We're going to go into some of the physiological implications of that, some of the nutrients that are supportive, some of the diets that are helpful, and then a single step-by-step holistic approach to kind of get people started with some simple steps. So we're going to go through the step-by-step guide, and we're going to choose a number of those steps today to go through. And then you can touch on some other things in more detail if you'd like. So the SAD is the Standard American Diet. I actually lecture all over the various places throughout the world, and so it's actually not just the SAD diet; it's the modern world diet. Processed foods and all of that. Nearly 2/3 of children didn't meet the RDA for vitamin E and zinc. The RDA is the minimum daily requirement that you need to prevent disease from setting in. So the RDA for vitamin C is the minimum amount that the average person needs to prevent scurvy. We're not just trying to sneak by. We want to have optimum health, and optimum health might be even higher levels. But 2/3 don't meet the minimum to prevent disease from setting in terms of vitamin E and zinc. Half didn't meet it for calcium. 1/3 didn't meet it for iron and B6. Only 1% of children met the USDA food pyramid recommendations. This was a number of years ago, and I don't really think that the pyramid recommendations are very stringent. So we can't really look at our children's peers in terms of what good nutrition might look like for our own kids. Those nutrients I just described on the last slide are just listed here, and I won't go through them all in detail, but you can see how important many of them are for cognitive function and motor function and immune function and neurological function and pregnancy development, prenatal development, and all sorts of things that affect growth and development of children. So this is really a big deal. This is not small. And, there are kids that there's a study that was done, or a case study that was written up on this boy. and I forget exactly what condition, but he had a very, very serious, like, heart condition and all this stuff going on. Well, he only ate like 3 foods, like chicken nuggets and a couple other things, not a single fruit or vegetable. And what they found out was that he had serious, like undetectable levels of vitamin C and very low levels of nutrients, and it caused major disease in this boy. And then when they reversed those, a lot of his symptoms improved dramatically. So we can't just, I mean, a lot of times I know it's like, it's frustrating. It's hard to think about how am I going to feed my child, and, you know, it's difficult. But once this mom realized how essential it was to get the vitamins in this child, she found a way to get them in. And so, you know, I just like to think that, you know, we can't just necessarily cross our fingers and hope for the best. We really should do whatever we can to try to improve the nutritional status. And I think that's true for all of us. I know I go through phases too, where I really get into certain things and then I forget about them. And so it's really a lifelong process of just eating healthy and figuring out what that is for you on a day-to-day basis, or a year-to-year basis, because it does change as well. So on average, children today don't get enough nutrients to build neurotransmitters, for adequate fuel, for strong immune system, for gene expression, for cellular function, for brain function, for growth and repair, all of these types of things. So, and we all know that diet and nutrition, at least I would assume, most people are aware that it's important not only for good health, but growth and development, prevention of disease, as well as healing. So let's talk about some of the healing diets in general. Usually healing diets focus on one thing, which is what to avoid. So usually a gluten-free diet avoids gluten, and a additive-free diet avoids additives and those kinds of things. And that's usually how special diets are defined. But, you know, there are a lot of varieties of candy and all sorts of things that are gluten and dairy-free, but filled with all sorts of sugar and junk. So we not only need to think about, well, what are we going to remove, but how do we make that diet healthy? Part number 2 is to replenish the nutrients that we all so desperately need. And so that's looking at how do we get a healthier diet, a whole foods diet, whether, avoiding the pesticides, having it organic and all these good things. It's wonderful to avoid the toxins and the problematic ingredients, but we also need to remember that we want to replenish all of the good things as well. And so that's part that's sometimes left out of special diets. That's, I think, an important message that I bring to the table. When I first started, people would do, Skittles and all sorts of things because they were gluten and dairy free. But we want to focus on how can we do a healthy diet. All right, so how can diet help? Well, we can support digestion, biochemistry, and all sorts of things. If we have what we call a leaky gut, where the gut is not absorbing nutrients properly and the gut is inflamed, we might find it important usually to remove the foods that inflame the gut. Add foods that reduce inflammation and healing. Add, and help healing. Add foods that supply good bacteria that's so essential for the gut and inflammation in the gut. When we have nutrient deficiencies, we want to increase the quality of the nutrition in the food and the way we prepare it, how digestible it is. So it's radically different if we were to, just take a grain and grind it up versus if we were to soak it or sprout it or do different things to it. It's going to improve the digestibility. Like if people eat beans, you'll notice that you usually soak your beans if you want to make them less gassy, for example. So the way you actually cook and prepare your foods actually improves the digestibility and helps not only prevent digestive upset, but actually helps with absorption. So we'll talk a little bit about that today, and I do a lot in my cooking as well. So looking at, for people with yeast overgrowth, women will realize if you have antibiotics, you might get, you kill off the bad bacteria, but you also kill off the good bacteria, then you end up with a yeast infection, for example. So it's not uncommon for kids to have yeast overgrowth. Yeast feeds on sugar, so in that case, people might be reducing sugar, removing sugars, reducing refined flours, possibly that turn to sugar, adding good fermented foods, which we'll talk about. If there's toxicity or poor detoxification, we want to avoid toxins in our foods, toxins in our food supply, all of that. And if our biochemistry is not working well, we might decide we need to either remove certain foods that are bogging that down for a period of time, or we might find that we would benefit from some special supplementation, depending on what's going on. So there are a lot of things that people can do, and people report a wide range of changes. Someone asked me at the booth today, what we see. And For me, there's dramatic examples and there's step-by-step improvements over time. And I'm not here to try to make magical, wild, crazy claims about things, but there are some pretty magical, amazing things as well. So children, I had one client who was 3. He didn't have any language. He was 3 months on the gluten-free and dairy-free diet, and he gained 200 words in 3 months on the diet. That is, pretty profound. Another father that I know, his son had never had a conversation with him. And 3 days on a special diet, he came downstairs and had his first back and forth conversation. And you can imagine his dad was quite floored. And if you heard Martha Herbert in the morning, I don't know the details of that, so I can't say per se, but there can be pretty dramatic, wonderful things when people pay attention to the various aspects of what somebody needs. So it could be relieving digestive problems, but not always. Like I said, they don't always have digestive problems. A lot of times I hear great things about language, social ability, focus, attention, hyperactivity, eye contact, sleeping, which is so critical for everybody in the family. Sleep is incredibly important, and if we don't get it, it can cause a lot of challenges. So it's really a relief when kids are able to sleep. Toilet training. I just heard a story today about a boy that was, I think, 16 years incontinent, and after a special diet, he was no longer. So, really very exciting things. In the end, I think what all of us as parents want is a child that's happy and healthy to their capacity and able to reach whatever their potential can be, and that they're, feeling as good as possible. And that's, I think, what we're all looking for, whether they make dramatic improvements or recover or all these things, just happier and healthier. I think all parents strive for that. So holistic nutrition, we're going to go through what I would call, which is my holistic nutrition approach. We're going to start with step number 1, which is cleaning up the diet. So that looks like taking out a bunch of junk. And this to me is the easiest thing, and this is why I put this as the first step. If you're new to diet, as we go through this talk, this is one of the things I think is the most dramatic thing. So taking out the food additives. So taking out the artificial dyes and the preservatives and all of these types of things. We know that they create hyperactivity in neurotypical children, and if you have poor detoxification, it's going to likely affect you even more significantly. MSG is monosodium glutamate. It excites the brain. It creates that excitatory problem. It can excite brain cells and create a lot of noise and things in the brain. And not only MSG, because many of you are probably aware that you'd want to avoid that, but also hydrolyzed vegetable protein, hydrolyzed soy protein, yeast extract, autolyzed yeast. Those kinds of things are all mostly MSG. They're free glutamate, so it's like the cousin to MSG. It's the glutamate that has this excitatory, and that's what makes you crave the chips or whatever it is, because it tells your brain, oh, this is exciting, eat more. Unfortunately, it's excitable, but doesn't have that kind of mechanism of calming things down later, so it's really often problematic for behavior and thinking and all sorts of things. Pesticides, artificial sweeteners, trans fats, the partially hydrogenated oils, added sugar, it's particularly large amounts of added sugar, but, keeping that as low as possible. High fructose corn syrup, actually in the manufacturing process contains mercury. So, and then, of course, allergens. So if someone had a known allergen or food intolerance, that would also be important to avoid. So in terms of pesticides, the Dirty Dozen is by the Environmental Working Group, and they look at all conventional produce and which ones had the most pesticides. So it looks like strawberries, for example, is a big one, but all of these on the list. So if I live somewhere we get lots of organic produce, it's pretty easy. But based on budget or where you live in the country, you may not be able to get everything organic all the time. So I like to let people know about the Dirty Dozen. To me, these are the things I would only buy organic. Whereas if I'm going traveling and I know that, for example, avocados are on the clean list, I would probably do avocados for my daughter rather than strawberries because they have much less pesticide if I don't have control. Yeah.
If you have to buy over the counter or grocery store.
Yep. Ah, how would you wash the things? Well, they do have those washing sprays and stuff. I just find that sometimes they impart this weird smell on the. I just don't necessarily love them that much. Gosh, it's a really good question. I usually will peel things, but they even spray it on like the buds and stuff, so it kind of is almost incorporated sometimes into it. So yeah, you can use a variety of different methods to try to rinse off the outside, but that's why sometimes it's for like strawberries, you can't wash them off anyway. You couldn't use one of those sprays. So there are probably other methods out there. I tend to use mostly organic, so all I can say is the sprays, which I don't tend to love. I think everything is helpful to some extent, and I do rinse things off. But there are, I think, I don't know if it's like water and vinegar, or I think there's other ways that kind of help to break up some of the waxes and the coatings and the things on it better than other things. But since I don't usually use conventional, I don't actually know other than the washes what some of those best things are, but I'm sure you could Google and find some other good ways to do it. It does everything. I think every step is helpful. Okay, so sugar is very problematic, but hopefully I can give you a few of the reasons why. It can feed yeast if you have yeast overgrowth. It depresses the immune system. It contributes to inflammation. Just these top 3 things are things that are not uncommon in children with autism. Also, years of eating sugar can lead to blood sugar issues and all sorts of things. So try to encourage people to reduce sugar. Refined sugars, the white cane sugar, the reason I don't like that is because it doesn't have any nutrients to help to process any minerals to process the sugar. So I prefer things like raw honey or gravy maple syrup or something like that has some of those minerals still intact. A few things to know, though, is that things like ketchup, 1 tablespoon of ketchup has 1 teaspoon of sugar. So, you don't necessarily think about it, but there are some really hidden sources. You look at sports drinks have 8 teaspoons of sugar. Soda has almost 10. Fruit juice, 13, more than the soda. So people think, juice is good. Well, it's probably better than a soda in that it doesn't have artificial additives and flavors and, those kinds of things. But it's not a low sugar option. And all sugar in the end does the same thing. So just be careful of those types of things that you might not be aware of. Non-dairy chocolate milk has 5 teaspoons of sugar, which is so it has about the same as the fruit juice does. And again, a lot of people don't always think about that. So just being conscious of all of the hidden sources of sugar that we may not be aware of, and then just doing your best to little by little take it out of your family's diet as you can. Step number 2 is cleaning up the home. So, yes, I know this is about nutrition, but, if you're working so hard to get the toxins out of your food, but then you're spraying toxins all over your house, it sort of defeats the purpose. So I want to share some things that are, I think, also important from other perspectives. So room fresheners, fragrances, perfumes, those sorts of things, those are strong chemicals, often carcinogenic. Anytime you breathe something in and you smell it, whether it's a fragrant candle or auto exhaust, you're not just smelling it, you are inhaling the vapor. It has to be detoxified by your liver. So these are things that we want to do our best to avoid. Flame retardants that they use on infant sleepwear and car seats have some heavy metals and toxins in there. Fabric softeners coat your clothes and also get your clothes are on your skin, so they can absorb into your skin as well. So all sorts of things, just being careful of anything that you would put on your body is going to go in your body. So you want to choose things that more or less you wouldn't mind eating. If you wouldn't eat it, you probably don't want to put it on your body. All right. Oh, and then, of course, in terms of food stuff, so artificial additives, but your cookware as well and your storage containers. Again, these all make a difference. And the good news here is, instead of this feeling overwhelming, I'm hoping this feels a bit of a relief, because we get bombarded by toxins all the time, and we do a great job detoxifying them. But there's certain things we don't have control over, like the air or, the water in a hotel or something. So, we have certain exposures. But there are things we have control over. And every time we take something we have control over off the list, it gives our liver and our body a little bit more capacity to detoxify the things that it needs to. So I'm hoping this is more empowering rather than overwhelming. In terms of step number 3, some basic supplementation. There's a lot of nutrient deficiencies that are common in autism. Some of these we see in scientific studies. Some of them we see clinically. But a variety of minerals, magnesium, calcium, zinc, iron, those sorts of things. B vitamins is a big one in autism. B6, B12. Tons of studies done on B6 and magnesium. I shouldn't say tons. A number of studies, multiple studies done on B6 and magnesium. Also, the importance of it's not folic acid, actually. It should be folate. And I'll talk a bit about the difference now. Folic acid is the synthetic oxidized form. We want the natural form, and there is a huge, huge difference, and actually some pretty big concern that folic acid has some, that we really want to go with the natural forms of folate as we can. So if you hear me talk about folate, it is different. There's different types of folate. And in one of Jill James's studies, where we were looking at that chart that builds glutathione, they supplemented folic acid, no improvement in the glutathione status. They supplemented with folinic acid, which is further down the pathway, and found an improvement in glutathione. So there is a really big difference in the capacity for these things to be helpful. And there's a variety of folates that might be helpful more than folic acid. Deficiencies and supplementation for ADHD, there's a number of them there. Again, zinc and magnesium and B6, as well as omega-3s and omega-6s. Iron, zinc, and all of these showed deficiency, and all of them showed improvement with supplementation. There's more than that, but those were just some of the ones. And where do all these deficiencies stem from? Well, number one, we talked about the poor American diet, picky eating and restrictive eating of kids, especially kids on the spectrum, insufficient amount of digestion, an inability for the cell to be able to utilize that nutrient, not being able to convert it to its active form, not having the proper other cofactors that are needed in certain pathways. Increased toxins will eat up and burn up your nutrients like fuel in a fire. So if you have more toxins and inflammation, all these good nutrients you want for all these bodily functions may not actually get to where you want them to go. Not the right amount of good bacteria or pathogens can affect it. And medications also sometimes do deplete nutrients. So understanding that and knowing that can make a difference when you talk with your doctor and figure out what might be supportive. So food is supplements, great, often important. Some people might need them. They have a certain genetic variant. They might have a bigger need for a certain nutrient or something like that. Maybe they're on a special diet and they're not getting enough calcium. But really, food, I feel, should be the foundation, because food has like an orange has 161 other cofactors that help you absorb the vitamin C in that orange. So nature is really smart. It knows what it's doing more than we do, really. And if we can get as many nutrients from our food, and then we can pick and choose if we think that someone needs some special nutrients. We can't eat a junky diet and try to add supplementation and expect that that's going to do the same thing. So these are some of the first 9 supplements that I tend to consider: digestive enzymes, probiotics, calcium, magnesium, B6, B12, folate, fish oil or cod liver oil, and vitamin mineral formula. Now, you notice that a lot of these would be in the vitamin mineral formula. Some people go straight to the vitamin mineral formula. Some people like to add one at a time if their child seems to be reacting to certain things, or maybe is picky and certain ones have a strong flavor, so they might start with the ones they can. Let's talk about some of the diet basics here. When we look at, this is my food pyramid, and it's really a way, since there's no one diet that works for everyone, it's really a hierarchy to figure out what kinds of foods are typically the best. And I looked at all the different special diets out there, what they work for, who seems to do best, what foods kids do best with, which ones are the most nutrient dense, easiest to digest since that's what they need. And the bottom of the pyramid are animal protein and vegetables. Second on the list above that is good quality fats for the brain. And then up from that, some fruits, maybe some nuts and seeds, maybe some gluten-free grains. There's no gluten on this chart. There's no soy on this chart. There's no sugar on the chart. And maybe some beans at the top. The reason I separate the protein is just because there are a variety of ways that people... The animal protein at the bottom has all the essential amino acids you need, and we need those building blocks. And then the very bottom are some of the special principles like fermentation or juicing or different things that can help add more nutrition as well. So we're just going to go through a few. Animal protein. Protein is the building blocks for everything. So all neurotransmitters in the brain, all enzymes in the gut, all growth and repair, it all requires protein. That protein has to be able to be digested, broken down into amino acids, and then reassembled into proteins in the body. So we need to get enough of this building block. And what we notice, so what I notice with kids, what do they eat? Carbs, 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 carbs. Protein, not so much. Some do. But sometimes we need to just realize how important protein is. Make a little effort to make sure maybe we include a little bit of protein with breakfast so that their day is a little more stable. Their mood and their energy is a little more stable. Everybody differs. Some people do well with higher protein, higher protein than others. Some people do better with, different amounts. But usually we do well. We do all want some protein, and just being aware that we want to focus on it and get some in. Lots of different kinds. Meats, poultry, eggs if you're not allergic, bone broths, organ meats we'll talk a little bit about. Vegetables. Lots of vegetables. And what I really try to do is focus on good tasting vegetables for kids. Because what I learned after doing this for 14 years is that I could give you the best nutrient-dense diet in the whole world. And if your child wouldn't take bite number one, then we would all fail. There's nowhere to go if they don't eat it. So we need to make it taste good as well, and we need to understand what kids like and don't like, and do our best to get these vegetables, but in a form that they're going to be interested in. So that we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. So just realize that I understand that picky eaters don't love vegetables, and my whole goal of my cooking course and my cooking cookbook is to make vegetables enjoyable and kid-friendly. So realize that I'm always keeping that in mind. And, we want to get various colorful vegetables. We'll have different nutrients and different phytonutrients and important compounds. Cruciferous vegetables are really important for detoxification, good anti-cancer properties, broccoli, and we hear all those great things. Fermented foods, we'll talk some about fermented vegetables and other things like that. Leafy greens, I'm going to give them their own separate slide because people give them lip service but then don't know what to do with them, and they think that romaine lettuce is a leafy green, and I'm not really thinking of that. I'm thinking of kale, collard greens, Swiss chard, those kinds of things. And so trying to get those in, and I have lots of ways to do that. Adding them to the smoothie. So if any of you are here tomorrow, we're doing a fun blender smoothie thing in the morning, and we're going to do a green smoothie. Dr. Martha Herbert was talking about green smoothies and getting kale and stuff in, and actually we are going to be doing a green smoothie tomorrow. I'm going to make it, like the first step of green smoothies so I don't overwhelm too many people. But that'll be fun if you can make it. But also, you can saute it, you can pan fry it, you can make it crispy, you can make kale chips. You can add it to soups and stews, you can add it to all sorts of things, but the secret, I think, is to make the bits of green very small. Because nobody likes to pull out a big stringy green thing and have it, be flopping around. It's not appealing to anybody, especially kids. So if it's small pieces, they could still try to pick it out, but it's texturally more interesting and easier to blend in. All right, fats and oils. Fats is one of my favorite topics. Fat is so important for babies whose brain is growing very rapidly, so it's good to use them as an example. Breast milk is 53% fat. So it's over half fat, and 25% of the milk is saturated fat. Saturated fat is very important. And we'll talk about why. So, I don't shun one fat over another except for the man-made fats, because we don't know as much as nature does. The omega-3s, the fish oils, things like that, we know in studies there's all sorts of important uses for those. So fat is one I think gets misunderstood. I like a whole variety of fats. The fish oils are good. Plant oils, but like olive oil, avocados, those great things you've heard of. But even plant-saturated fats. Coconut oil has some great properties. I also do like animal fat. If someone tolerates dairy, there's even some really good dairy fat options. If you're not allergic to dairy. And the ones that I would avoid are all the rancid, bleached, deodorized, oxidized, vegetable oils. The canola, the safflower, the corn, the soy, the cottonseed. In fact, most of these are genetically modified. And cottonseed oil, actually, because they usually use it for clothing, heavy amounts of pesticides. The fish oil studies, I just included a few things here. Brain development, a study on brain development in fish oils, autism in fish oils, ADHD in fish oils, as well as omega-6s for that. Another study done with autism on speech and eye contact coordination, all these kinds. Also behavior, cognitive things, inflammation, depression, heart disease. There's studies on the inflammation, depression, and heart disease as well, but I just wanted to put some of the ones that I thought would be more interesting or relevant to you. Let's talk, too, about saturated fat, because this is the one where I think it's most villainized and misunderstood. As I said, because babies need it so much because it's so essential for the brain. It's essential for brain growth and development. It's important for the bones, the liver, the lungs, the immune system. So I like both plant-based saturated fats as well as animal saturated fats. Coconut's a great one. It contains all sorts of great properties, easy to digest, burned immediately for energy, so it's really good for energy. In fact, some people use it for weight loss because it has that component of not being stored, but being very easily digested and burned as energy very easily. So coconut oil is an interesting one. Animal fats. This is the one where I think it's misunderstood significantly. So animal fats contain saturated fat, as we all know, but they also contain quite a bit of monounsaturated fat, almost 50%, 50-50 saturated, monounsaturated. It might be like 45-55, depending on what kind of meat you're talking about. But we never hear about the monounsaturated. We know monounsaturated is wonderful, but you never hear that actually animal fat has quite a bit of it. But the saturated fat as well, we just discussed, isn't a bad thing. There's also fat-soluble vitamins. Only animals make fat-soluble vitamins. So you and I convert carrots into vitamin A. We take sunlight and make it into vitamin D. But we may have some pathways that don't work so well, so we can also eat animals that make that for us. And so we can get, if we have good quality like grass-fed foods, we can get those vitamins. Now here's what I think the most fascinating part is. We hear about how important vegetables are, which I would absolutely agree. But we cannot absorb the minerals in the vegetables without fat-soluble vitamins. So you could eat platefuls of vegetables, but if you don't have fat-soluble vitamins, you can't actually assimilate them and use them very well. Now, you could try to get them from your beta-carotene and your carrots and things like that, but, like I said, having these animal foods already have them preformed in this way really is a good thing. So I think, some moderation and some balance in life in terms of eating some good quality animal foods with lots of wonderful vegetables is going to give you a number of these important things, as well as these essential fatty acids help with the immune system. We know vitamin D helps with strong bones, right? Antioxidants, all sorts of things. And cholesterol is animal food as well. And cholesterol is also not bad. We know that it's oxidized cholesterol that's really a problem. We know in heart disease, it's a lot of the inflammation, the sugar, those things that raise some of those numbers that we don't want to see, creating inflammation, adding damage that the body then uses cholesterol for. I won't go into all of this. Obviously, everybody's going to need to look and research this for themselves. There's a really great book called Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary Taubes. He's a really great science writer, and he writes this fascinating history of cholesterol and animal fats and things, and he really explains a lot of it very, very well. So, especially for children, but I would also personally argue for adults as well. Every sex hormone is made from cholesterol. If we don't have enough cholesterol, I don't know how we're going to be doing in the hormone category. We need it for regulating blood sugar, strong bones, digestion, brain development and brain function, and even oxytocin, that really good bonding hormone. So, and if you heard Dr. Shaw speak, actually, he's going on right now. You can get the recording. He talks about cholesterol and actually some of the research on children with autism and cholesterol, which you might find helpful. They found that children with autism often, if anything, have low cholesterol. And actually, low cholesterol can have a wide variety of cognitive and behavioral and other challenges. So I'm just touching on some of these things to kind of whet your appetite and understanding of them. There's some foundations of the pyramid. I won't go into too much of these just to save us some time, but grass-fed being really important, so you get those fat-soluble vitamins and those good fatty acids. So grass-fed or pastured. There's significantly higher levels, so if you're feeling a little tight on your budget, well, if there's twice the amount of vitamin A or 8 times the amount of vitamin D, maybe you can have a little bit of smaller portion, but for calorie per dollar or nutrient per dollar, you're still going to do better off doing your best to get these. And there's many good ways. There's a article on my website on how to do that in a cost-effective manner. Broths, looking at like bone broth, chicken broth, things like that, they have really great minerals in there, especially if you add some vegetables as well as gelatin and things that help support digestion. So that's a really good one. Fermented foods. This is one of my very, very favorites. In my cooking course and in my cookbook, I talk in great length about making your own fermentations, which you can make at 1/10 the price of buying them. And fermented foods contain good bacteria. There's live good bacteria like you find in yogurt. But usually the commercial brands don't have that much live bacteria. And you might want a dairy-free option. So I'll talk about some sources in a minute. But this good bacteria in these fermented foods, they help keep peristalsis of the bowel moving, so elimination is regular. They get rid of bacterial toxins. They make needed nutrients. They help to digest protein. They help to support the immune system. All sorts of things that are really crucial. In fact, we have 10 times more bacteria than we have cells in our body. And if we did not have this good bacteria, we would not be alive. Actually, people are very sick that don't have where they have some really significant anomaly in terms of their bacterial status. So bacteria was here before we were, and we have evolved synergistically with them, and they support our health. And they help keep the bad guys at bay. So probiotics are important. You can take probiotics in a supplement form, but in a fermented form, you can get, it was a huge number, like one serving was the amount in a whole bottle or something like that. I'll have to look up the statistic, but it was very significant. Raw sauerkraut, cultured vegetables, coconut milk, coconut yogurt, a non-dairy yogurt, kombucha or coconut kefir, those kinds of things. Some of them are drinks that are sort of sweet and sour and fizzy, almost like a soda. So my daughter loves kombucha. I don't think she's actually ever had a soda. For her, kombucha is soda, and it's delicious. It's got a little sourness, so you might start with one that has more, a little bit of fruit juice added at the beginning. Juicing helps you to extract lots of nutrients in a small space, especially for kids that don't like the texture of vegetables. It might be a really good place to start. I won't talk about that right now. Okay, I'll just skip through some just so we have time to get through everything. Okay, here's some of the top special diets that I talk about in my book. Today we're going to talk about gluten-free, casein-free, because it's one of the main ones. We're also going to talk a little bit about the very last one there, which are some of the low salicylate diets. So gluten and casein, you've probably heard of this. We're not really talking about an allergy like what they call an IgE-mediated you eat peanuts and you go into anaphylactic shock. That's a different type of an allergy. Usually, what we're talking about with gluten and casein is typically a sensitivity. Now, kids with autism sometimes do have allergies to dairy and gluten and other things. But a lot of times someone will go get tested for an allergy and they don't have an allergy and they think, oh, well, I don't have an allergy. But we're really talking most often about sensitivities because an allergy would have probably been identified for you. Or you would have noticed because it happened so immediately. With a sensitivity, they're delayed. They could take a couple hours to a couple days. So if you got chronically constipated from dairy and you ate it 5 times a day every single day and it took 3 days days to show up, you would never know that the dairy was causing your constipation unless you actually tried to remove it. There are other ways to test for food sensitivities as well. So you can have this food sensitivity reaction. You can also get an opiate reaction, and we'll talk about that. There's various inflammatory responses, autoimmune responses, and other things. So you can test for these. You can have doctor help you test these. But sometimes the best thing to do is to try to see if when you remove them, there's any improvements, because there's so many ways to test them. Unless you tested all the different ways, you may not catch it. But if you do want to test, if you have celiac in your family, when you talk to your doctor, if you want to know, you want to do the testing beforehand. Because once you start the diet, then those markers may not show up, and it may be a little more difficult for you later if you want to go back and decide then. It's kind of up to each individual person on how they want to do that. I don't want to discourage anyone from taking action, but I want to give you all, as many pieces of the detail as you can. So think of proteins as these long chains, and each of these beads is an amino acid. And when we're supposed to break them down into each of the beads, absorb them, and rebuild them, as I said. What happens with gluten and casein is they have these weak bonds in a certain place, and then they don't get fully broken down, and they form opiates. So if you look at opiate use, whether it's morphine or heroin or whatever it is, these are all opiates. They fit in the same opiate receptor. What do we see? Addiction. In their case, to drugs. In this case, to foods. High pain tolerance, inattentiveness, spaciness, aggression, stimming, mood contact, poor eye contact, mood changes, a variety of even maybe difficulty speaking, things like that. Interestingly, the studies have shown that children with autism have increased rates of opiates in their urine, or opioid compounds. So, if you have gluten, casein, or soy, and you don't have enough DPP4 enzyme to break them all down, and you have a gut that's leaky, in other words, it allows large proteins through that it shouldn't, these opiate protein chains can, break off into this chain, leak in through this leaky gut, and cause opioid activity in the brain in the same receptor that the drugs cause. So for some people, that's very addicting. For some people, they like to do some digestive enzymes. Looking at things like, I helped with a study at Arizona State, and they actually started this GFCF study by looking at starting before they even started the diet. It was a GFCF study, and they actually did 30 days of enzymes before they started the diet, which I thought was interesting. So some people might incorporate enzymes into their diet plan. Sometimes that might help break down a few of those compounds before they actually start the diet. Again, everybody's different in the way that they do things and what would be the right approach for each individual. As you can imagine, I can't necessarily say what each person should do, just giving you some things to think about. Here are those studies, by the way. These are the 4 of the studies that were done that I know of on opioid activity in the urine of children with autism. Also some digestive problems with gluten and casein in autism, reduced autistic symptoms on a gluten-free and dairy-free diet, research on gluten depression, gluten and anxiety, gluten and schizophrenia, the food sensitivities and ADHD, and a variety of other things. So I heard the gluten summit the other day, and they said that gluten is actually not digestible by any humans. It just depends if it, bothers you only a tiny bit, and you can kind of live your whole life without any problems, or if it bothers you a lot. But it's not really a food that's digested by humans. It's actually a hybrid of 3 things, and it's very difficult to break down. Particularly wheat, the gluten in wheat. So wheat, rye, barley, spelt, kamut, triticale, commercial oats, you can buy certified gluten-free oats, are all gluten grains. There's also hidden sources, so sometimes the MSG type things or the flavors or the spices can be cut with gluten. So apple pie spice or any spice blends are always pretty much cut with gluten. So just being aware of some of that. Soy sauce has gluten unless you get special wheat-free soy sauce. And potatoes and French fries can have some hidden sources, so you want to read the labels. Casein foods, all animal milk of any kind. All right, and then other foods. So soy also can create opiates. I included a study there for you. Not a good substitute for dairy. or protein, because it's so difficult to digest, so inflammatory, the gut has so many challenges. I'm not a soy fan either. So then corn, it depends on the person. I just think organic corn is probably the most important thing so that people avoid GMO. And whether they need to go corn-free is, going to be individual. But also then there's grain-free diets, the specific carbohydrate diet and the GAPS diet and the paleo diet. They can be really helpful diets sometimes for people with gut issues. The low oxalate diet's a pretty fascinating diet that I won't go into today, but I talk about it a lot in my website and my book and stuff. But I want to talk about salicylates before we go, because a lot of times I hear, I tried the gluten-free and casein-free diet and it didn't work. Now, sometimes that's because people don't do it 100%. It's important to do 100%. Otherwise, they said that the first time gluten, you can react to gluten about the size of a grain of gluten, of wheat. The second time, you only need 1/100th that amount. So a tiny, literally a crumb on something, for some people, is enough to invoke a response. So being very, diligent in not having, maybe a grandparent or something give a cookie now and then. So that's one of the challenges sometimes I see with gluten-free and casein-free diets that aren't helpful. Now, again, I know nothing's helpful for everyone, so sure, there's some people that don't benefit. But sometimes what happens is that people start to do good things. They start to clean up the diet. They start to add more fruits, and they add more raisins and ketchup and berries, and that's great. However, if you have that biochemical pathway thing I talked about, then for you, this thing right here with that little orange box, for that person, they can create hyperactivity, red cheeks, red ears, irritability, bedwetting, day-wetting accidents, digestive problems, skin rashes, hives. Hives can be lots of things, but all of these can be. But if you see a lot of these grouped together, aggression. I had one client that was aggressive multiple times per day, very aggressive. And I thought, let's look at salicylates, because I usually think of that first with this. Took them out in that month. I talked to the mom. Not one episode. We're talking maybe dozens of times a day. Not one episode. She said one episode in the month that she pinned back to maybe something that he had eaten. So, sometimes dramatic things. And again, you think, oh my gosh, these foods are so good, which they are. They're wonderful. And hopefully you don't need to avoid them for very long. But some people do benefit from a low phenol or a low salicylate diet for a period of time. Apples, grapes, berries, spices, cinnamon, mint, tomato. So, and they're very addictive too. So if you see, if I see a child that has lots of tomato sauce and ketchup on everything, and they're eating, one of my clients would eat 17 apples in 3 days. So that just doesn't seem, standard. So I kind of look at that, what else could be going on? Do they have a lot of these other symptoms? Does it seem to make sense to consider this? So I don't want to discourage you from adding nutrient-dense things. So if this is too much for you, you might just think of, let's start with the good nutrition and not worry about all this stuff. But there's some of you that might be already doing a diet, and some of these things might resonate with you, and it might be something to consider further. There's other diets for that. I won't go through all these other diets today, but like I said, in my book, I do talk a great deal, and in a lot of my writings, I talk about some of the grain-free diets. The low oxalate diet, like I said, is one of the ones I think is quite fascinating. I was talking to a doctor about that today. There are, in other words, doing our best to base the diet on the bio-individual needs of the person. So everybody's going to need something different. I would never say, okay, berries are terrible, everybody should avoid them. No, they're great. But for you or me, you might need to reduce them, avoid them for a period, work on some pathway. There's moderation, again, in terms of how people respond to some of these. So diet strategy, start with a nourishing diet. Again, I can't say specifically what each person would do. I think always working on a nourishing diet. I think, you can never go wrong trying to get more good nutrition in. If I were going to typically kind of generalize things, a lot of people start with gluten-free and dairy-free because it's sort of the foundation of all the other diets or many of the other diets anyway, and it has some of the biggest problems. Either two are the hardest foods to break down. And when when I polled the room, most people on a special diet or on that diet, it In fact, most of my clients, now of course I have a selective population, they only come to me, after they're ready to do something, but almost every one of them, it's rare that I find that they tolerate gluten or dairy, just to give people just a general sense. Then people might adjust it. They might say, oh, well, maybe I need, maybe there's ways that I need to look at inflammation, or I want to look at some of these other intolerances, and then modifying it if they need to. And then what do you end up with? Which is the diet that's right for your child. So the bio-individual nutrition needs of your child. So just briefly, picky eating can be caused by many, many things. What do I want to say? It may not be biochemical related, but since I do nutrition, I'm looking at the potential biochemical reasons for picky eating. It could be sensory, it could be medical, it could be anxiety based, it could be, behavior based. There's a lot of other reasons, and so seeking out a feeding therapist for really incredibly picky eaters can be very, very, very helpful. But there also can be biochemical reasons. Things like opiates are very addicting. So if you were eating those and you were getting this feeling from them, then you would be tunnel vision eating nothing but bread and milk and cheese and pizza and mac and cheese and those kinds of things. I understand that then people say, well, but that's everything my child eats, so now what do I do? Yes, I understand it is tricky, and I'm not here to, what am I here to say? I'm here to say that what I've seen is the ones that are able to make it through that hurdle, they often notice their child opens up their diet quite a bit after that, starts eating vegetables. I see some people nodding in the audience. Maybe they've had that experience. I see that a lot. They'll start eating vegetables. They'll start eating more protein. Because it wasn't so much that they were picky about those foods. It was that those foods were giving them something, and they were uninterested in anything else. Once they don't have that to be in the way, then they become more interested usually. Also, MSG, excitatory, makes food taste very good and exciting, so people might be addicted to or attracted to those particular additives. Also, deficiencies. Zinc deficiency will affect your sense of smell and your sense of taste, so everything will not be very flavorful, and mushy broccoli that tastes like cardboard, probably not too appetizing. So sometimes working on getting a few nutrients in, some basics in, for some people can really support them. In fact, I met a mom here that said that was her child's experience. Also, just looking at other things, sometimes microbial imbalances can cause cravings for sugar and other things. And so just looking at if the picky eating has any biochemical piece. But also other things for picky eating, sometimes it's texture. A lot of times for kids, it's texture. So, what does your child like? One of my clients their child liked pancakes with a spread. So the mom put chicken in the pancakes, chicken in the spread, vegetables in the spread. He didn't care as long as it had a certain texture. Most kids like crispy and crunchy. So in my book, I go through dozens of kid-friendly, crispy and crunchy vegetables. Kale chips, Brussels sprout chips, carrot chips, butternut squash chips, carrot fries, rutabaga fries, cut celery root fries, parsnip fries, butternut squash, hash browns, all sorts of crispy, crunchy vegetables. And, if I make carrot fries at my house, they don't last till the next day. Everybody loves them. So the texture is really important. So this is where you as parents can start to be a detective, trying to make things as fun and flavorful. Add a little salt, We need a little bit of nutritive, high-quality salt as well. It's usually the processed foods that's overloaded with salt. So a little bit to bring out that flavor is often pretty helpful. Some people will incorporate vegetables into muffins and pancakes and meatballs and things, but I don't have too much time to go into that. That can backfire on some people, so you need to know your child as to whether they would benefit from that or not. Making the diet as healthy as possible. Here's my step-by-step guide to a GFCF success. If you come by and share your email, we will send this out to you along with the slides and the ebook. And those are just some of the steps. You'll notice the most important thing here is I don't usually suggest starting the diet till step number 5 out of 6. So it's a lot of get ready, get prepared, try things, get confidence, get educated, all of that before you actually begin, and that will just set you all up for some good success. So to leave you with some words of encouragement, the hardest thing about a special diet is the steep learning curve. And the truth is, there's a lot of new things to learn, dozens of hidden ingredients and all sorts of things, so it can seem overwhelming at the beginning. But you will get the hang of it, And it will not be any more difficult to feed your child this way than it is the other way. At least in my experience, we're totally gluten-free. There's nothing more difficult for me than I just choose different products or I choose different food choices. And so once that steep learning curve is done, it's really quite very similar to any other way and energy it would take you to feed your family. So although it's not always easy at first, if and when you start to see some improvements, and your child starts to feel better, and then you have a little more time and you're a little less stressed, it really is helpful, and it really does make it easier as you go, easier all over. And, there's no downside to improving nutrition. So just doing what you can step by step. Some people dive in head first. Some people take step by step, and there's no right way or wrong way. And everybody needs to figure out what's right for their child, whether they're trying a special diet or whether they're just trying to add broccoli and kale into their diet. So like I said, I'll give you all those things. I'm in the booths. There's a little room across the way over there, kind of to the left across the way. I'll be there for the rest of the day today, and I'll be there tomorrow, and I do the supplement smoothie thing in the morning tomorrow. So if you want to see how you can put enzymes and fish oils and vitamins and things in your green kale and avocado smoothie that tastes good, then join us then as well. And I'm happy to do my best to support you in any way I can and answer any questions for you. So I wish you all the best on your journey. Thank you so much.